Hello and welcome back everyone to the latest episode of An American in Thailand, airing every Friday. This program is broadcast to you from Ratchamakan University of Technology, .39, and it will be coming to you in two parts. For the first part, I will be introducing a certain topic about being an American living here in Thailand. It could be about food, travel, culture, lifestyle, government, politics, anything like that. We'll then take a break, and in the second part of the program, we'll get into more examples and more specifics of whatever the topic is that we're talking about. All right, let's get to the program. Welcome, everyone. My name is Gary Gray, and I am your host for An American in Thailand. I'm an American English teacher here at Ratchamakan University of Technology, .39, and I've been here for 8.5, almost 9 years now. We're coming up towards the end of our current semester, so I will have been teaching here for 9 years very soon. So being here for that long, I have a pretty good feel for the Thai culture, Thai lifestyle, things like that. I'm still learning. You learn something new every day, but I have a pretty good feel for it. And before moving here, America was the only place I lived before that. So I feel like I have a pretty good sense to compare the two countries. So for this program, we usually talk about things that are maybe a little more lighthearted, food and things like that, and travel, different places to go to. Differences, some weird little quirky differences. We talked recently in one episode about differences in banking, which seems a little bit weird. But that banking is actually easier here in Thailand, which seems strange. You would think America with technology and everything like that would be more advanced. But today's episode, we're going to talk about something that's maybe a little more serious just because of what's going on in the world right now. We're going to discuss the difference between the use of military force overseas between the U.S. and Thailand. So in the first part of our program, we're going to discuss kind of the historical differences. And what you'll see is probably going to be pretty obvious. I think a lot of people know that the U.S. does a lot of stuff with their military. So the results you're going to see here are pretty obvious. But then in the second part of the program, we're going to discuss why. And I think our first answer is going to be obvious why, but I think it's an interesting discussion. I think there are some things that maybe we don't really think about when we think about these sorts of differences, like why they're occurring. All right, so one of the reasons I do want to discuss this is because there's right now, as we record this program is being recorded in early January of 2026. I almost said 2025. It's 2026 now. In fact, it just reminds me that I think I put 2025 on one of my documents yesterday. I need to fix that. So it is early 2026. And just within the last 2 weeks, really, the United States has used military force in 3 different countries. Now, they're not all-out wars. In Syria, we struck some terrorists who had attacked some U.S. military personnel who were there in the country. The U.S. does not have many military people in Syria. Why would we? But we do have a few that are there for logistics to try to kind of suppress terrorism. And they were attacked by those terrorists. And so the U.S. launched a strike on those terrorists there. Some of those terrorists from the same organization also function in other countries, and some of them are in Nigeria. So we struck them in Nigeria as well, although those people had not attacked us, so you could say that maybe that wasn't right, but whatever. We did that. And then most recently, just within the past few days, as of when I'm recording this, the United States did a military operation in Venezuela to go in and arrest their country's president and take him out of there. Okay, again, You can argue whether or not that was right or wrong. A lot of people believe that was wrong. Just because I'm American doesn't mean I'm going to defend it because America did it. Nope. Actually, I'm personally against what we did. Although Maduro was not a good guy, so I don't think anyone's really going to miss him. But I still don't agree with going into another country to take out their president. So I'm not saying whether any of those are right or wrong. I'm just saying they happened. So 3 different military actions within 2 weeks. That's a lot. And so that's why I wanted to discuss this topic. Because you don't really see that with Thailand, right? So let's look at these differences historically. Let's talk about Thailand first. So Thailand rarely uses military force abroad. Rarely. The Cambodia conflict right now, that's really a border dispute. So you can't really say you're using military overseas. I mean, I suppose overseas means any foreign country. So if you launch a missile into Cambodia, technically that's the military overseas, but not really. You understand what I mean. You understand the difference there between fighting over a border and going to some foreign country thousands of miles away to do something militarily. So I don't consider that use of force overseas. During the Vietnam War, Thailand was involved, but it was mostly just logistics. Thailand was on the side of the U.S., and really they were just like letting the U.S. use military bases, things like that. There weren't, I don't believe at least, I didn't fully research this, but I've certainly never heard about this. I don't think there were a lot of Thai military personnel actually in Vietnam fighting. I don't believe that's the case. I think Thailand was just helping coordinate. So, for example, the Udon Thani airport was used a lot during that war. In fact, if you fly up to that airport, you still see military planes there. And Thailand buys all of their military planes from the U.S. We talked about that in another video. It's kind of a weird thing because they buy most of their ships from China. So that's a little weird, since China and the U.S. are kind of on opposite sides. So the planes you see up at Udon Thani are basically all U.S. planes, the military planes. And so, yeah, they're kind of the very similar planes to what was still being flown back in the Vietnam War. So it's those same planes. I mean, not those exact same planes, but similar kinds of planes like that were being flown into Udon Thani during the Vietnam War. U.S. planes. Now, the U.S. didn't need to use that all the time. So it's not like Thailand was heavily involved because the U.S. was helping the South Vietnamese government. And so they controlled Saigon, which is now Ho Chi Minh City at the time, which of course has its own airport, so you could fly things into there. But on occasion, you'd want to fly things into other places. So we used the Philippines sometimes, but that's pretty far away. And so we also used Thailand sometimes. So Thailand was basically just coordinating logistics with us mostly. But they were on the U.S. side. So again, Thailand is not really using their military force abroad. They didn't really send people into Vietnam. During World War II, it's kind of the same thing. You sided with Japan and you were aiding Japan here in Thailand, but it was mostly inside the country. And partly it's because you were almost forced to. Japan said, help us or we're invading. And so Thailand decided to help them. Some of the help was legitimate. Thailand was not really a fan of Britain and France at the time because those colonial powers had stolen some of their land. Like the Brits took some land for Malaysia because they were kind of controlling Malaysia. And the French took land from Cambodia and from Laos, or put them into Cambodia and Laos. That was part of Thailand. So you did help Japan during World War II, but again, it was mostly inside this country, like building the railroad in Kanchanaburi, out there, that railroad that was being built. It was that sort of thing. So once again, Thailand really didn't go outside, didn't go abroad with its military. Now, if we look at the U.S., it's quite the opposite. They are frequently involved in overseas military action. I just mentioned to you that in the past 2 weeks, they've done 3 things in Nigeria, Syria, and Venezuela. And over the past 20 years, there have been a lot more. They've gone into Afghanistan. They went into Iraq. They actually went into Iraq twice, but the first one was more than 20 years ago. Actually, the second time we went into Iraq was 2003, and when we went into Afghanistan, it was 2001. So I suppose those were more than 20 years ago as well. But we were still there 20 years ago because we were there for a long time. We recently did some strikes on Iran. We've done strikes on Yemen. There are probably others that I'm missing in there that I'm just not even thinking of where we've gone in and at least done some minimal airstrike type of things. So over the last 20 years, we've done all of those things. And if you go back further, there's many, 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 many other ones. From little ones like we went into Grenada, which is a small island in the Caribbean. That was a little bit crazy. We went into Grenada in the 1980s. So that's a small one. To big ones like the Vietnam War. I mean, you guys helped us, but it was the U.S. troops that were there fighting. So the Vietnam War, the Korean War, World War II, all of those big ones we were also heavily involved in. All right, so there's been many, 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 many times the U.S. has sent their military overseas. So Thailand and the U.S. seem to have an extremely different view. May not be entirely view. It's going to be capabilities. We'll talk about that in the second part when we talk about why. But I also think their view of it is somewhat different. So they have a very different view of foreign intervention. So in the second half of our program, we'll look at why. All right, let's take a quick break. Welcome back, everyone. All right, so we're talking about the differences in overseas military use, between Thailand and the U.S. So in the first part, we determined that Thailand does much less. It's much less involved overseas with military stuff. So now let's just discuss why. Why is there such a big difference? Because the U.S. is always doing it. We've done it 3 times just in the last 2 weeks. Thailand, almost never. Almost never. The military here is mostly used just for defense, kind of as deterrence. The military here is stronger than that of probably any country around us. Maybe not Malaysia. I'm not sure exactly how strong theirs is, but I'm almost certain the Cambodian and Lao militaries are much weaker than Thailand's. And Malaysia Myanmar has lots of other things to worry about. So it's mostly for defense, mostly just defensive. We're not going overseas with our military doing stuff. So why? Why is there this big difference? I think there's 3 reasons. The third one is going to be kind of related to the first for obvious reasons. The first reason is the most obvious one. It's just resources, money, things like that. Thailand is a developing country with a dramatically smaller military than what the U.S. has. So the capability just isn't there. So even if they wanted to, if Thailand wanted to send forces to, I don't know, Taiwan because they wanted to defend Taiwan against a potential invasion from China. Or maybe they want to send them to China to help China invade Taiwan. Who knows? I don't know what side Thailand would be on there. But if Thailand wanted to, even if they wanted to do that, they really probably can't. There's not really much they're going to be able to do. They can't send a lot of resources overseas and maintain a good defensive structure here. So there's not a lot they can do. So that's the biggest reason, and it's probably the most obvious. So we're talking about this topic, and you're probably like, yeah, well, obviously, of course that's why. But I do think there are two other reasons. The third one will kind of be related to the first one, just in the size of the U.S. government, but there's actually a reason behind it that I'll give in the third one. But let's talk about the second reason. And the second reason I think is related to culture and the religious background of the two countries. So here in Thailand, Buddhism is the main religion. And in the United States, although there's a lot more diversity there and a lot more people who are probably just atheists, quite frankly, historically, and even still now, even though it's smaller, even still now, Christianity is the main religion there. And if you look at how those two religions treat the idea of war, they are both supposed to be religions of peace, but in Buddhism, they seem to be much more serious about that. You don't often see Buddhist countries getting into a lot of fights. You see a little bit of it in like the northern part of Myanmar, where a lot of the Buddhist people are fighting the Muslim Rohingyas. I think they're the Rohingyas. I think that's their name. So you do see it sometimes. But for example, when a lot of like the monks wanted to protest during the Vietnam War, what they would do is just set themselves on fire, which is scary, but that's what they would do. That's what they would do. They wouldn't go attack someone else. So it's much more serious about peace. Now I'm sure a lot of Christians who may be out there would say, oh, well, Christianity's about peace too. Well, it is if you listen to what their leader, who would be Jesus, if you listen to what their leader preached, yes. But they don't always do a very good job of it. And that's been true for like thousands of years, at least 1,000 years. They had the Crusades back in the Middle Ages or whenever that was, where they would have these basically conquerors go into the Middle East, and they were quite violent. They had what was called the Spanish Inquisition, which was quite violent and would kill a lot of people. Even if you look at something like World War II. Now, I don't think Hitler was really doing that because he's a Christian, because he was clearly just trying to take over Europe. And most of the other countries were also Christian countries. But clearly, given what he was doing to the Jewish people, over 6 million of them got killed by the Nazis in World War II. Clearly, there's a religious angle to that, and he did claim to be Christian. So, being of Christian faith has not seemed to ever stop someone from, at least a government. It stops individuals. For example, there's a Quaker movement within the Christian faith, which is very peaceful. So there are definitely some very peaceful Christians. But like on the whole, like if there's a government being run by people who are Christians, that's not going to stop them from going to war. Whereas a government that has a lot of people in it that are of the Buddhist faith, they may be more inclined against going to war with someone. I think just the religious background of the two countries makes Thailand a little more concerned with keeping the peace. So I think that's a second reason. So that's what I was saying, that there are some reasons we don't really think about that might be real. And I think that's a real one. I think there's a real difference there. Christianity does not have a very good track record when it comes to taking peace seriously. Whereas here in Thailand, I think they do. I think in Buddhism, that is a more serious thing. All right, and the third reason is really why the U.S. does so much. So this is kind of related to the first one because it's about Thailand not doing a lot of foreign wars. whereas the U.S. does do a lot. And again, it's related to the size of the military. Whereas Thailand has the small military, where the U.S. has a huge one. And that's why I'm saying it's kind of related to that first one. But there's a reason here, which relates only to the size in the sense that the U.S. has the capability to do it. And that is that there sometimes does need to be kind of a world policeman to prevent atrocities from happening. Now, that does not mean that I'm telling you that the U.S. is always using its power for good. That is not true. Even most Americans ourselves believe that the second Iraq War was not smart. Most Americans now believe that the Vietnam War was not smart. I think the majority of American people believe that what just happened in Venezuela was not smart. Although that's much more small scale, not a full-blown war, but it could destabilize the area. Nobody really knows what's going to happen in the future. So probably not a smart idea. And again, that's not a defense of the Venezuelan president who was there, because he was not a good guy. Most people in the world believe that he stole their last election, that he lost. So he is not even a legitimate president. Not defending him. But that still doesn't necessarily mean that you, as a foreign country, have the right to just walk in there and kidnap their president, which is what the U.S. did. So I think most Americans don't agree with that either. So I'm not saying that America is always using its power for good. And in fact, because of that, a lot of people in the world actually don't like the idea of the U.S. playing world policeman. That's a very negative term to a lot of people. They think that's a bad thing. But if we're going to be honest and look at the world realistically, there probably does need to be an entity like that. And the U.S. is really the only country with the capability to do that. They have the biggest military. China is catching up quite quickly, but the U.S. is still the biggest military. And the countries behind the U.S. and China are way behind. So there's no one even close. China is getting close, but other than that, there's no one close. And like I said, if we want to be honest and real about the situation in the world, you sometimes do need to have that person to step in, that country to step in as a world policeman. I know it's an idea that a lot of people don't like, especially since the United States is not always fair, not always wise, and not always right in what they're doing. But again, the reality is it's needed. If you look at something like World War II, if the United States had not stepped in, there probably would have been many thousands more who ended up dying. I think the quote-unquote good guys, sorry, I know Thailand was on the other side with the bad guys, but what are called the Allied powers. The Allied powers probably still would have won eventually. For example, if you take the European theater, let's forget about Japan for now, but if you look at Europe, for example, Germany trying to invade Russia in the winter was stupid, and they were getting killed. The Germans were getting killed there. So eventually, Germany was probably going to lose. Eventually. But it would have taken a lot longer. It would have taken a lot longer without the help of the U.S. A lot of people in the U.S. are arrogant about it and basically say that, oh, we won World War II. That's not entirely true. Britain probably did as much, if not more, than we did. A lot of other countries fought back. Maybe they weren't successful because they get taken over, but they did fight back. They did try. They did resist. They did what they could. And Russia did a lot, even though Russia is not on the same side as the U.S. these days. We were during that war, and they did a tremendous amount. As I said, they were really crushing the Germans on the eastern side of the war. So I'm not saying that the bad guys would have won if it wasn't for the U.S. in World War II. No. Germany still probably would have lost, but a lot more people would have probably died, and the war would have lasted a lot longer. And then, and there were atrocities going on there. If you recall, like I said before, 6 million Jews were killed, and it wasn't even just Jews. They also didn't like the Romani people because they were not Christians. We called them gypsies at the time. I think that's a bad term. We don't use that term anymore. But they were killing them. They didn't like gay people, again, because it went against the Bible, so it's not good. We don't like those people. So they were killing the gay people as well. So they were killing millions and millions and millions of people in Germany and any of the areas that they controlled around Germany. So it was important to get that stopped. And in the 1990s, we saw a similar event on a much smaller scale, but once again, a genocide was going on in East Central Europe. And once again, the U.S. stepped in and stopped that. I actually think that was a NATO action, so there were more than just the U.S., but the U.S., being the biggest military, did send in the most amount of people and equipment and airplanes and things like that. So the U.S. was chiefly involved in stopping that. I'm sorry I can't tell you which war that was, because there were several wars that happened in that area. I don't know if it was the Serbian-Croatian one. I don't remember if it's when Yugoslavia fell apart. I don't remember exactly which of the wars it was that there was that genocide going on. But there was, and it was based on religion, again. It was based on religion, but there was a religious genocide going on. And so the U.S. stepped in, again, not by themselves, but the U.S. stepped in and stopped that. And we stopped it pretty quickly. Once we got involved, it ended quickly. So my point is, it's things like that those are the reasons why there probably does need to be a world policeman. Now you could say, oh, well, it should be the UN. That's what the UN's there for. Yeah, but the UN doesn't have a military. The UN can't do anything. It can maybe pass some sort of resolution asking some military to get involved, or they do sometimes have these peacekeeping forces, but those are exactly that. They're just to keep the peace. They're not going to end a war. Once the war is over, they can maybe go in there and keep the peace, but they're not going to end a war. So that's kind of the third reason that America's doing so much of this stuff overseas, is that sometimes they need to, because the world does need kind of the world policeman. It's not a good thing. A lot of people hate that. When you talk about America being world police, it gets a lot of people really annoyed, because it's like, why is the U.S. the one that is given that role? Because again, they're not always right. Even though I am from America, I'm not going to tell you that my country's always right. We're not. We're not always right. So why are we doing that? But again, as I just explained, well, it's necessary. Someone has to do it. Biggest military on earth. So that's one of the additional reasons why the U.S. is going out and doing all of these things. Okay, so those are the reasons why. The most obvious one, probably the first one, is just that, again, Thailand does not have the resources to be doing stuff like that. So that's the most obvious one. And if that's what you think is the number one reason, you're probably right, because that is the most obvious reason. But I do think there are these other two reasons. I think there's the cultural issue, and I do think there's this issue of world policemen, which, again, I know most people don't like. I don't even like it. I don't like that someone needs to do that, but in reality, someone probably does. I hate to say it, but someone probably does. And who's going to do that other than the one with the biggest military? So there you have it. Okay, so this was, I think, an interesting discussion about the use of military force overseas. And you can see such a huge difference between Thailand and the U.S. It's happening all the time in the U.S. 3 times just in the last 2 weeks. It almost never happens in Thailand. So I wanted to give you the reasons why I think that is. Some of them are really obvious, but some of them aren't. Some of them are less obvious, like the cultural reason. All right, so that's why I wanted to have this discussion. And that's it for today's episode. So thank you for joining us for today's episode of An American in Thailand. Let me reach out to any young people out there and ask them to consider our university here, Ratchamakan University of Technology, Peranakan. We have a nice little university. We are growing a bit. We're starting an international program coming up soon. So we got a nice little university here. And if you're studying English, you might even have me as a teacher. I've been here a long time. I'll probably stay here for a while longer. So maybe you'll have me. All right. So please stay with us and tune back in next week for another interesting episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.